Welcome to the second floor of the Duncan Student Center. Brand new episode of Shamrock Sports. Took a brief hiatus last week. Rooney, I don't know if you were aware, but South Bend was a frozen tundra.
It was.
So we had to take the weekend to thaw ourselves out, so we decided not to do a show. But we're back, and unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of great basketball to watch for both the men's and women's basketball team for Notre Dame. But we're going to get all of that and more with Shamrock Sports right now.
Hello. I'm Father John Jenkins, President of the University of Notre Dame, and thank you for watching Shamrock Sports.
Welcome back. Austin Rooney, Caroline Pineda joins us this week. I'm Johnny Soper. Let's get right into it. Notre Dame men's basketball on the road against Miami earlier this week. Tough loss, 62-47. And let's take a look at some of the highlights, or depending on how you look at it, maybe not so highlights. But Miami played well, and there were a few good plays from the Irish here and there.
Scattered.
Irish got off actually to a hot start. John Mooney, who's been great this season, drains a three early. In the game, they were up. You see right there, 11-2. They were up as many as 13-4 before the first media timeout, but then Miami got going. How about this? Ibuka Izundu. How'd I do on that one, Rudy? Nice dunk on the feed from Zach Johnson. On the defensive breakdown from the Irish. Next play, Chris Likes, unafraid to go right at Jawan Durham. And he got the foul. Miami inching their way back, and then Dejan Vasiljevic, the Aussie from downtown. Tell you what, he had a heck of a game. Actually had a career high in rebounds for Miami. Nick Giogo been coming alive as of late. Nice baseline drive to the rack. Had a great game against Boston College. Didn't play bad against Miami either. How about this ball movement from Miami, though? Just pretty. Moving it around well, and then Sam Wardenberg gets the finish at the rack. First half was very close, and then Lawrence gets the miss here at the end. Finds Izundu, slams it just before the horn sounds, and that was pretty much where, if the Irish had any hope left in that game, it was lost on that play. Started second half, Johnson. He's only 6'2", but he doesn't play like it. Reverse layup goes at the beginning of half number 2. And then Lawrence, in the face of Leszewski, drains the three. Canes go up by 15. Irish, though, trying to inch their way back. Very next possession for Notre Dame. Mooney with a nice find to the cutting Jogo. That cut the deficit to 12. Coach Bray called a timeout, but after the timeout, that was pretty much all she wrote for Notre Dame. Vasiljevic once again. Top of the key. Nothing but net. Nice play here from TJ Gibbs, though. Finds Harvey ahead of the field. It didn't mean much as far as the final score went, but good highlight for the Irish. And then Vasiljevic just for good measure. Last minute of the game, three is good. And the Canes take care of Notre Dame 62-47 in an embarrassing offensive output for the Irish. DJ Harvey led the team with 14 points. John Mooney, he snaps his double-double streak. He had 8 straight heading into the game. He only got 6 rebounds. He did get 11 points, but he still leads the ACC in double-doubles, and he's pretty much averaging a double-double. Jogo had a season-high 7 rebounds, but, well, Miami's defense was just too good for the Irish.
It really was, but that's a common theme this year. You know, you say it over and over, their defense was too good for the Irish, but at some point the Irish have to figure something out. You know, you're playing ACC basketball, and you can't go 4 for 28 from behind the arc and expect to win these games. And so when you have Prentice Hub going 1 for 6 from deep and TJ Gibbs going 1 for 6 from deep, you're not going to win these games. So at that point, you got to figure something else out on offense, and they've just failed to do that so many times this year.
And Coach Bray gave a lot of credit to the Miami defense. It wasn't as if Notre Dame was missing a lot of open shots, even though they did miss some of their opportunities. But he said they just got in our face. They had great ball pressure, and we couldn't do anything about it.
They may have gotten in Notre Dame's faces. That doesn't mean Notre Dame did not miss a lot of open shots. 4 for 28 from 3, no matter which way you cut it, is missing a lot of three-pointers. And what we saw throughout the game, what Notre Dame's done so successfully is John Mooney will get the ball down low, and then he'll kick the ball out, and he draws a double team when he's down low, and kicking the ball out, he allows these three-point shooters to have really good opportunities. So Notre Dame gets shots away. Their problem this season, more than anything else, is they're missing open threes. We're seeing guys like Jogo and Harvey and Prentice Hub and TJ Gibbs, they're shooting so poorly from three-point distance. It's right around 30%. It's just not going to win you many basketball games.
Yeah, and for once, I completely agree with Rooney on this.
Whoa.
I know, shocking, right?
Sound the alarm.
Crazy.
Eleni, do we have an alarm in the studio that we could?
Rooney and I agree.
Caroline
Actually,
and
there might
Rooney,
be two things we agree on today.
This is an historic moment.
This is crazy.
On Shamrock Sports.
Yeah,
Appreciate
it really
the history
is.
for a second.
But to back Rooney up here, against BC, Notre Dame shot 50% from behind the arc, 10 for 20. Against Miami, shot 14.3%, not 4 for 28. So that is one of the big disparities between those games where they've been able to be successful and those games where they just completely fall apart. And it's all in that three-point shooting. And like Rooney's saying, they can get the open looks, especially when Mooney kicks it out. But the problem is really making those open shots.
Yeah, DJ Vasiljevic from Miami, game high 15 points, first career double-double for the Aussie. And the Irish, I think, Rooney, if you want to after the show, you and I, and if you want to help, that's totally cool. We're going to send a petition to the ACC to ask that we only play Boston College for the rest of the year.
Now, that's not a bad idea.
We would be undefeated.
that seems to be the only team that we can beat in the ACC. So
there's
anyways.
Wake Forest coming up and Georgia Tech, so
there are winnable games on the schedule. You're right about that. Coach Bray after the game, quote, "You score 47 points, you're not going to win a league game." That's going to be accurate almost 100% of the time.
Except NC State.
It's funny because Virginia Tech, when they beat NC State, it was 47-24.
Well, but NC State scored, what'd you say,
24.
24.
Which is their lowest in the shot clock era. So that's probably the one exception to Bray's quote. But
Okay,
it's
but
just
I'm
funny
willing
in
to put
context.
a great amount of money on the, well, actually, I was thinking if Rooney and I played in that game when they scored 24, just us two against Virginia Tech's 5, we could probably get to above 24.
Well, if you tune into my
I don't
radio
know.
show
You
with
ever seen
Ellen,
him shoot threes?
No, and I don't really want to. But on my radio show with Ellen, which everyone should listen to, by the way, Tuesdays at noon.
Shameless plug
We have a
for
segment called I
WVFI,
Could
which is
Not
not affiliated
have done that.
with.
No, but our
NDTV.
segment is I could not have done that, which kind of contradicts your point, And we talk about people who say I could have done better than that, and we say really, and we examine those statements. So Johnny,
I'm with
would you like
Caroline
to be a guest
here.
on that
Okay.
segment?
I'm going to agree with you, Caroline, here
Yeah.
again. This is
Okay.
a surprise.
ACC basketball is hard. I will
It
give
is very
NC
hard.
State that.
By the way, you're going to get an invoice for that promo there. Miami in the second half used a 30-10 run to dispatch of the Irish. Coach Bray said, "I thought we were going to have a really good offensive night. They started off really well. They were up 13-4, and then he says we couldn't get back into rhythm. I would give Miami's ball pressure credit." Where does this team go from here? I mean, we talked about a few winnable games coming up, but the season is not salvageable.
It's not. At this point, going into that Miami game, I still held out a little bit of hope that Notre Dame would find a way to get back in things. They had pulled off a win versus Miami. Then they played Georgia Tech and Wake Forest. Should they win those games, they go into 4 consecutive ranked matchups with a 5-7 record. And all of a sudden you say, you never know, this is still salvageable season. The loss versus Miami, they were outscored 58-34 in the last 36 minutes and 20 seconds of that game. It was atrocious down the stretch. You go into halftime, and you think, look, you're down by 5. This is still a winnable game. And that all ended seconds into the second half when Miami pulled away in a big way. And Notre Dame, from here, again, the only way they could make any sort of run at the NCAA tournament, you need at least 8. Whoa. I'm going to clarify what I'm saying here.
Those words do not belong with Notre Dame.
The NCAA tournament.
Are you talking about next season?
To make the NCAA tournament, a team, I would say, in the ACC needs 8 wins and 10 losses in regular season play. After that, you go into the tournament, you probably need at least 1 or 2 wins. So if Notre Dame somehow rattled off 6 of their final 8 games of the season, theoretically, yes, you could still make the tournament. But that's not a reality, as you point out, John.
Right. They would be making a movie about that
20
years down the road if that were to occur. Irish now 2-8 in ACC play and 12-11 overall. Young team, injuries, everyone understands that. Those are things that you cannot control. However, it just seems like the past couple of weeks they have not been playing to the level that I think that we all know they can play to.
And I really think it's that consistency. I think that's what it comes down to. Because you see flashes. Like Jogo went off against BC. Hubbs had his moments. Gibbs had his moments. Mooney has been the most consistent presence for the Irish. But you really don't have anyone who can come out week in and week out and make sure that they are that defensive presence and, just that overall leader for the Irish. And that's really something that you're lacking. And I think Pfluger being hurt is a big part of that. He was that vocal leader, that leader on defense. But without him, you just don't have anyone that can take over that role.
Yeah, final score 62-47. Irish shot just 32%, as you mentioned earlier, 4 of 28 from 3. They had 14 turnovers. This Miami team wasn't great, and so this was a winnable game for them on the road, but they dropped the contest. Before we get to the women's basketball team and what they did against Miami, Ellen Geyer this week, we were discussing on Monday, we thought that we didn't give enough of the other sports around campus some airtime, so we asked Ellen, our other non-basketball sports correspondent, to go around campus and give us the update on that.
I'm Ellen Geyer, and here's what's going on in Notre Dame sports. After suffering a pair of losses in Columbus, Ohio, to the Ohio State University Buckeyes, the Notre Dame men's hockey team dropped 3 spots in the rankings. The Irish will look to bounce back this Tuesday when they face off against Michigan at home. The Notre Dame women's tennis team also fell to the Buckeyes this past weekend. They're now 3-1 on the season, but 1-0 in the ACC after beating Pitt. They look ahead to 4 home matches starting this Saturday. Also playing at home this weekend is the Notre Dame men's tennis team. This team was ranked 11th prior to their first loss of the season, which came this past Wednesday to the University of Illinois, who was ranked 14th. The Irish will look to bounce back in their doubleheader at home. The Notre Dame track and field team had a successful performance last weekend at the Mayo Invitational, the infamous meet that they host every year in Loftus Fieldhouse. They now look forward to postseason competition, where they will be competing in the ACC Championship meet. Also looking forward to the ACC Championships is the Notre Dame swimming and diving team. The women's team went undefeated on the season, and the men's team finished just at 500 with a record of 4-4. Also looking forward to ACC postseason competition are the Notre Dame men's and women's fencing teams, 2 of the most successful squads that the school has seen this year. They both sit atop their relative conferences and now look forward to the ACC Championships, which will take place at the end of February.
Welcome back to Shamrock Sports. Thanks, Ellen, for that update. All right. With everything that's been happening with the Notre Dame men's basketball team this season, at least we always said we have the women's team. Reigning national champions, they play extremely well. They have had a tough couple of weeks. Last Sunday,
very tough.
On the road against North Carolina, they lose 78-73, their second loss of the year. They pick up a couple of wins. Poor Clemson and Georgia Tech. It's not good to get Notre Dame women after a loss. They lose. Clemson lost 101-63, Georgia Tech 90-50. And then they go on the road against Miami yesterday. And Miami, a top 25 team, but they lost 72-65. What is happening?
I mean, they came out looking flat, like 12 turnovers. This is just not the Notre Dame team you're used to seeing. So I think it might have been one of those cases where they played down to their opponent. And I think that's something that you do worry about when you're a team that's this good so consistently. And that's something that they have to avoid, because you can't come out and expect to just win all your ACC matchups when you have teams that are going to see Notre Dame on the schedule and going to want to beat Notre Dame. It's that Notre Dame, that UConn mentality. And so you can't ever enter a game flat. You really have to be prepared to play your best basketball no matter who your opponent is. And I think, those best teams, that'll get them at times.
And now all of a sudden, Notre Dame drops to 4th in the ACC.
And that's prior to the Miami loss. So after the Miami loss, they could fall as low as 8, 9, who knows how far exactly. But it's going to be troubling for Notre Dame to try to find their way back into a top 4 spot for a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Should they win the rest of their games and go ahead and win the ACC tournament, they shouldn't be an issue. But there's no guarantee of that, considering what we saw over the last 2 weeks from Notre Dame. The Watsco Center has not been kind to Notre Dame this past week. Not going to blame the Watsco Center, but a loss for the basketball team, men's side and on the women's side.
Maybe it's the warm weather.
Maybe it's that.
They don't know how to play in warm weather.
Yeah, no, probably.
It's an indoor sport, but
yeah. The Florida teams come here in the winter.
Something about landing and seeing the palm trees and it messes with their psyche.
The beach, swimming, rain.
Am I just crazy? Is there any merit to that? I'm just throwing things out. I'm trying to make excuses, but there's not much to say.
There isn't much there. I mean, and if you look down the Notre Dame lineup and who played well, you have the top 5. You have Turner, Shepard, Mabry, and then you have Agumba, Wally, and Young. Those are the 5 starters, and they were all on the Wooden Award watch list coming into this season.
And they're the same starters that came back from last year's national championship.
They are.
Plus, Brianna Turner,
Yes.
who was injured for almost all of last year. And
last
all of last year, and she comes back, and everyone's thinking, "Oh my goodness, this team's going to be loaded."
That was the
they have
idea.
all the starters back.
Exactly.
And Brianna Turner.
This is the most talented
hasn't
team
been
in
that way.
college basketball, in women's college basketball.
Yeah.
This team is more talented than that UConn team.
Definitely.
Even though I thought UConn was going to win that game versus Notre Dame earlier this season, that UConn did end up winning, I still think Notre Dame has the best roster in talent. But then again, Turner put up 5 points. They struggled to get the ball inside to Turner, and if she's only going to put up 5 points, it's going to be tough to win a lot of basketball games, especially when none of the other starting 5 put up more than 20. So, again, it was a rough go for the entire offense.
And the thing that concerns me more than the starters, because they've been there, and once they get into ACC tournament and NCAA tournament, I don't anticipate them having too much trouble. But you need to rely on your bench, and that bench was scoreless from field goal range against Miami. So 2 free throws, and that was it. And so when you look at those players who you need to be developing as the season goes on before you get into the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament, and that's not happening, that's my bigger concern. Because I think the starters have been there. They're all returning. I think they will be fine. They'll figure it out. But the bench really is what concerns me.
Hurricanes made 9 of their first 13 shots, and give them a ton of credit. They played well. They scored 7 of the final 9 points after Notre Dame cut the deficit to just 2 with just over a minute left in the game. And so they earned the victory, no question about it. Irish shot just 37%. And we'll take on a Florida State team at home on Sunday. Rare doubleheader on Sunday, by the way, with the Notre Dame women playing Florida State at noon, and then the Notre Dame men playing Georgia Tech later at 6. So if you don't have any homework to do on Sunday, and if you're a second semester senior, you never have homework, just hang out at Purcell Pavilion from noon until, 9 or 10 or whenever it ends. So we had an interesting conversation, though, on Monday, and you brought up a good point about the women's basketball field this year is wide open. I mean,
so
it's
different.
not just UConn and Notre Dame at the top and then everyone else. I mean, Louisville's up there. Even in the ACC, NC State, Florida State, Miami, all these teams up at the top of the rankings, and there isn't a clear-cut favorite. And so there's just a lot more parity in women's basketball this year, something that we're not really used to. I mean, think about the past 3-4 years. The only names you've seen, Notre Dame, UConn, Mississippi State.
Yeah.
Really. But that's not the case this year.
Right, and I think it's good. I think it says a lot about the direction that women's basketball is going in, and I like it. I like seeing more competition because you get to March Madness for the men, and it's insane with your bracket, and you're thinking, who do I pick? What upsets could we pick? And in the women, you kind of advance all the number 1 seeds and call it a day. So there's really no excitement when you get to that point because you know that there's the teams who are way ahead of everyone else, and that's not fun to watch. And so when you get into this now where you have the talent, it's much more spread out. Recruits now, when they are McDonald's All-Americans, are not just picking between Notre Dame and UConn and Mississippi State and South Carolina, like the typical schools. They're looking at other options. They're looking at things that men's players have always looked at, like playing close to home, things like that. The coaching staff more. Like there's a lot more that goes into the decision other than these are the only 2 places where if I want to be good in college and have a chance to win a national championship, I need to go. And so I think it's a good direction for the sport, and I'm happy with where it's going.
Well, yeah, there isn't a single top 25 recruit in this upcoming class going to UConn, and that's something that we haven't seen because
that's
normally
almost unfathomable.
It is, and normally when you think about it, if you're a top player in college, in women's college basketball, as you mentioned, Caroline, you choose Notre Dame or Duke because those are or Notre Dame or UConn because those are the 2 teams that have any shot at winning a national championship. But that's all of a sudden changing, and you're seeing players go to all different schools. Just to give you an idea of who is in the top 5, there are teams that have found success in the past: Baylor, Louisville, Oregon, Notre Dame, UConn. That's the current top 5. So still, those are schools that have traditionally been good in women's college basketball. Not necessarily 1 or 2, but generally pretty good. The first team that I see that's really a surprise, Marquette at number 8. They're not a team that's traditionally in the top 5 or top 10, and they're finding themselves in contention to move up even further.
But even with Baylor, like when they were so good and they went on that run, it was Brittany Griner. Like it was one player, and so sometimes you have these players who are so good, and if they choose one school, then sure, that program's going to be good for as long as they're there.
Right.
But now it's changing, and the other thing to note that women's basketball is different than men's for is that you don't have one and dones. And so you have these programs that can establish themselves as programs, and you have girls that can turn into junior leaders and senior leaders and stay there and help the freshmen as they get acclimated, and it becomes this process of players recruiting players. Whereas with Duke, Zion's gone next year. So no one's going to go to Duke to play with Zion, and no one's going to go to Duke to try to win a national championship with Zion because it's just not an option. He's leaving. And so you have a different landscape there too because you have this opportunity to go build a program with players who are going to stay more than 1 year if they're really that good.
And I think it makes the game a lot more intriguing. I mean, the NCAA tournament this year on the women's side is going to be fun to watch because you're going to see some upsets happen. I mean, nobody could have expected Notre Dame to lose to North Carolina and then Miami within a string of 8 days or so, or whatever it was. I mean, that is almost last year unheard of, and it's happened this year, despite the fact that they have arguably a more talented starting five on this year's team than last year's reigning national championship.
I'm not going to push back completely on your idea that the women's tournament's going to be that much better this year, because I think it will be. But I still think, if I had to make predictions, I think UConn's going to the Final Four, and I think Notre Dame's going to the Final Four. And why is that? I think it's the experience, the senior leadership. You look at a team like Notre Dame, they still have that incredible starting five that's not going away. And that team has they've got a lot of experience playing in Final Four games, playing in finals matches. These are huge games, and Notre Dame's proven they can do that, and so has UConn. So I would still pick the two of them to make the Final Four, and if they're not in the same side of the bracket, they're on the other side, I would pick them in the finals still.
Right, and I don't disagree, but I think their path there is going to be different, and I think that's going to become more and more different as the years go on. I don't think you're going to have these 60-point blowouts as much anymore, and so you're not going to get the tournament and see this competition that's just so far below that it looks like a college team, like a high school team. Like, it's going to be better games that you're seeing in the tournament, and I think that's something to look forward to because I think that is really the direction it's going in. And I think the other thing that's going to change is that you look at men's basketball and you look at games that are important so early on in the season. Like Gonzaga, Duke, you know, Thanksgiving time, that's going to start to happen more women's basketball. These early matchups are going to start to matter more, whereas now it's kind of like, sure, Notre Dame, UConn women's matters during the season, but they're both going to be in the Final Four in March, or, you know, so you kind of just write it off and say, like, sure, it's interesting, but we'll see them both there anyway. And so you start to care more, I think, about earlier on in the season, you know, the more interesting that later on gets too. So,
a couple of things that I think of with these losses. One, it's going to help in the short term because it's going to fire the team up. Coach McGraw is not happy, and she's going to get the girls playing a lot better than they have in the past couple of weeks. The only drawback, though, is the seeding for the tournament. I mean, these losses might hurt, and if they stumble once or twice down the road,
they're not going to be a one seed.
They're not going to be a one
seed.
Right, and so that could have potential serious effects for them in the postseason. But I think in the short term, it's going to be good for them because they're going to learn they're going to have to play harder against good competition. All right, let's move on now to an ACC discussion focusing on men's basketball. It's obviously one of the best, if not the best, conference in the country. And a great slate of games this weekend, by the way. Virginia and Duke for the second time. Duke took the first meeting earlier in the year at Cameron. It was a close game, I think 2-point game that Duke won. And then Virginia has to turn right around on Monday and play North Carolina. So let's talk a little bit about the ACC on the men's side. And I have the standings here. I will pull them up right here. Virginia and Duke and North Carolina, all 8-1 in conference. So this is a huge weekend. The top three teams are going to play each other. It's going to be pretty fun to watch. And then Louisville, Chris Mack has quietly put together a very good season for the Louisville Cardinals. I feel like they're not getting enough attention.
They're not.
And he, remember, was the coach at Xavier, transferred over to Louisville, got hired. It was a great pickup, and he's proven why he's been such a good commodity in the college coaching ranks. So let's get to the picks. And Ellen, when she was not recording her Around ND segment, put together this little PowerPoint that shows you where all our picks are. So we'll start with Virginia Tech at Clemson. The Hokies won that crazy low-scoring game against NC State. That was last Saturday. NC State, an embarrassing display.
Yeah, the lowest scoring game for them in the shot clock era, 24 points. So not something that you want to see there.
Absolutely not. It was nothing short of embarrassing.
So give me the Hokies, and that's a really good Buzz Williams coach defense.
Yeah, I agree with Johnny there. They haven't beaten a ranked opponent, or Clemson hasn't beaten a ranked opponent all year, and this is not going to be the first. Virginia Tech is number 11. They're a solid team. They've won 3 of their last 4. I picked them as well. I'm
actually going to go with the upset here. I have Clemson over Virginia Tech. They were 10-2 at home. Virginia Tech lost last week to Louisville. Let's see if Clemson can pull it off.
Speaking of Louisville, the Cardinals at the Seminoles, and we just gave Chris Mack a ton of credit. And I'm going to say that Louisville is going to be a dark horse in the ACC tournament. Give me the Cardinals on the road.
And once again, I agree with Johnny. They beat UNC at UNC, Virginia Tech on the road as well, and then at home against NC State. They're fully capable of beating this FSU team.
I also have the Louisville Cardinals winning this game. They're coming off of a win versus Virginia Tech, as I mentioned just moments ago. So all three of us going with the Louisville Cardinals.
Miami at North Carolina. They just picked up a win. Miami did over Notre Dame, but still one of the worst teams in the conference, and they do not pull off the upset on the road at the Dean Dome.
Yeah, shocker, I agree again. Miami tied for last in the ACC with none other than Notre Dame and two other teams now. At UNC, I think enough said. I'm going to go with the Tar Heels at home as well.
I'm going to go with the Tar Heels as well. They put up 113 points last time out. This is a UNC team that is extraordinarily talented. They playing against a 2-8 Miami team in conference play. They did just win, but still, I'm picking UNC.
NC State, they're going to bounce back on the road at Pitt after that embarrassing performance last weekend.
Yeah, their 3-game losing streak is made up of 3 ranked opponents. So I do think that at Pitt's on a 6-game losing streak. NC State's going to be able to put it together and beat them on the road. Yeah,
I have to think NC State responds. That was an embarrassing matchup for them, and I think they find a way to get past Pitt. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but NC State wins this one.
The Fighting Jim Boeheim's at home against Boston College, and, well, the Eagles, they can't really beat anyone, including us, and we're not that great this year, so I'll take the Orange Men at home.
Yeah, once again, I agree. Syracuse has a great home environment. BC is not going to go on the road and beat a Syracuse team like this one.
No, I totally agree. I think Syracuse is a pretty darn good team, and we talked about how BC has struggled, and you know they have Kai Bowman, but it sort of starts and ends there for BC. So I've got Syracuse in this one as well.
Last time Notre Dame played Georgia Tech on the road, it was a close game, 2-point game, and the Yellow Jackets come to South Bend on Sunday to return the favor, and I think Notre Dame bounces back after their loss against Miami. I will take the Irish at home. It's going to be one of the few remaining wins that I think the Irish will get on the schedule, but I like Notre Dame at home.
And see, I actually disagree with Johnny here. I'm going to go with Georgia Tech again. I mean, they got the job done the first time. They can come on the road and do it again. The reason Notre Dame won that game was Mooney's 22-point, 14-rebound performance. I don't think he's consistent enough to put up another one of those, and I think Georgia Tech comes in and wins this one.
Mooney's still averaging a double-double, 14 points per game, 10.7 rebounds per game. He is that good. I'm going to stick with the Fighting Irish here. I think it's going to be a very close game, as all of Notre Dame's games against non-ranked teams are. I got Irish in a close one at home.
Blue Devils at UVA. That is going to be a fun one on Saturday. It's going to be a great environment in Charlottesville. I think Virginia gets revenge. I do. I think Duke has not played its best the past couple of weeks. And I think UVA at home with that defense, I like the Cavaliers.
I completely agree. Tony Bennett's pack line defense is the strongest in the nation. And to go up against Duke, that's what you need. And they're not going to let Duke beat them for a second time this year. I think they have the defense to pull off this one.
I think you guys have a good point. I'm actually going to go with the Blue Devils on this one. I hate to say it, but I think the Duke Blue Devils are going to pull off this win. They're just too talented, I think, for this UVA team, and they're going to win this one on the road as well.
It's going to shape up to be an interesting finish at the top of the ACC with Duke, Virginia, and North Carolina. Virginia on Monday goes on the road to the Dean Dome to take on the Tar Heels. And we didn't pick that one, but let's just go ahead and pick it now. I'm going to say Virginia beats Duke. They ride a high streak, but then they have to travel. And I think North Carolina takes advantage of that, and they pick up the win at home.
Well, I think, again, I mentioned that Duke beat UVA. So under those circumstances, I think UVA finds a way to rebound and ends up pulling off that win.
I think Virginia's going to win both of these. I have a lot of confidence in them right now. I think they're a team that's going to find their stride towards the end here. They have a good trio of players that's going to be able to come into the end of the season and rely on that defense, and I think this is when their offense starts clicking to give them that other half.
Okay, real quick, just to get you guys on the record, and we'll reevaluate this as the season plays out. Who wins the ACC?
Duke.
Virginia.
I will say Blue Devils. I like Coach K.
This is regular season, right?
This is regular season,
okay.
Conference titles. So we'll return to that. All right, great discussion today. I thought it was really good, and a couple of great games this weekend at Purcell Pavilion. So both men and women play on Sunday. Notre Dame and Florida State at noon, the women team, and Notre Dame and Georgia Tech later at 6 p.m. Thanks for watching Shamrock Sports, everyone. Have a great day.
All night, babe, make me wanna say la 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 la.